In the early years of American tap dance, she stepped into a space almost no woman occupied, and in doing so, helped expand what the art form could be. Welcome to Hey Dancer and my weekly series, The Rest of the Story. My name is Miller DeRay, and if you're new here, this is where we dig into the dancers and choreographers who changed everything, whether or not the world ever learned or remembered their names. Now, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you're watching or listening, and you can support the podcast in a super easy way by just doing, all the engagement stuff like, comment, and share. It tells the platform that these dance stories, these legacies, matter. Okay, shuffle, step, hop, let's get into it. She was born August 14th, 1916, in Chicago, Illinois, the youngest of five children. Because she was so small, her family called her Tiny. The name stuck for a while. Her father, Hector, worked as a chef, most likely in the kitchens of Chicago hotels, though the exact places were never recorded. He was known in the family as a storyteller, the kind who could fill a room with laughter or hold everyone silent with one of his ghost tales. Her mother, Harriet Bell, had come from Georgia, where her own mother had been born enslaved. Her parents met and married in Atlanta, then moved north to Chicago in search of steadier work, part of the Great Migration, when millions of black families left the segregated South for new lives in northern cities. They eventually settled in Chicago's Black Belt, a narrow stretch on the south side where most of the city's black residents were confined by segregation and housing laws. Overcrowded but full of life, churches, clubs, and corner theaters lined the streets. When she was 5, the family was hit with heartbreak. Her father died, and her mother struggled to cope. That is when her older sister, Mary Bell, truly became the steady one, the sister who made sure she was fed, dressed, and kept on track. Mary Bell would become the one who raised her. Once a month, her brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles would stage a family show right in their house on Wabash Avenue. The living room became the stage, the dining room the audience, separated by sliding doors. They made their own instruments, pots and pans for drums, tin cans for percussion, and paper rolled into cones that buzzed like kazoos. Everyone had an act, and neighbors crowded in to watch. Admission cost 10 cents. By the time she was 6, she was organizing her own little show gangs, gathering neighborhood kids who could sing, tap, or play those same homemade instruments. They performed on the sidewalks while neighbors watched from the stoops, tossing coins into a hat. Those early shows were more than games. They were her first lessons in rhythm, confidence, and showmanship, skills that would one day carry her far beyond Chicago's Black Belt. When she was 11, she came down with a painful skin condition, eczema. Her doctor told her mother she needed sunshine, so a family friend took her south to Savannah, Georgia to recover. While she was there, the local school put on a dance contest, East Side kids versus West Side kids, and she was asked to join in. She danced, she won. Now, she'd always loved to dance, but that win made her think maybe she could do this. Maybe she was better than she'd believed. By the time she returned to Chicago, her skin had healed, and so had her confidence. That spark stayed with her. She started ditching school to catch the afternoon shows at the Oriental Theater, where the great swing bands played: Cab Calloway, Fletcher Henderson, Duke Ellington. From the balcony, she studied the dancers on stage, memorizing every step. Then she'd rush home, practice what she'd seen, and hurry back for the next performance to see if she'd gotten it right. But she never wanted to look like a copy. Even as a kid, she had the precocious sense to know that repeating someone else's steps wasn't enough. So she twisted them, bent the rhythm, added her own flair, daring to change and maybe even make better what she saw. And so that was the start of her style, learning by watching, absorbing, and transforming, self taught, no lessons or studios or teachers. She was 13 when she got her first real break. Count Basie's swing band was coming through Chicago, and local dance teacher Sammy Dyer was asked to assemble a chorus line for the show. She auditioned and got in, the youngest in the group. But when the costumes arrived, there was a problem. They were skimpy two-piece outfits meant for grown women, and on her they just sagged. The producer threw up his hands, unsure what to do. Before he could decide, she spoke up. "I don't dance in dresses," she said. "I dance in pants." Her family rushed to help her pull an outfit together. Her cousin donated a pair of black trousers. Her brothers, both waiters, gave her one of their white jackets, which a seamstress friend cut down to fit her tiny frame. Add a black tie, a cummerbund, and her scuffed dance shoes, and she suddenly looked the part of a headliner. When she showed up in her new pants outfit, the producer took one look and made a call. She wouldn't be part of the chorus after all. She'd perform out front as the show's soubrette, the solo dancer between the band numbers. And when she finally walked on stage with Basie's band, she stood there alone, dancing in pants, sharp and buoyant, with a rhythm that was entirely her own. She didn't know it then, but those pants would follow her for the rest of her career. She was 15 when she joined one of the most respected troupes in black vaudeville, the Whitman sisters. They were pioneers, four black women who ran their own touring company, training and managing an entire African American cast of singers, dancers, comedians, and musicians. Their show was known for its polish and pride, a kind of finishing school for young black performers. They groomed legends like Bill Bojangles Robinson and Ethel Waters. Now, her mother and sister approved only after a formal meeting with the Whitmans. The eldest, Mabel, promised the girls would be safe, separate lodging from the band boys, curfews, and $12.50 a week, $5 of which would be sent home to their families. It was the middle of the Depression, and even that small sum made a big difference. Life on the road was unlike anything she'd seen. 20 or more performers, a full band, and a chorus line that stretched clear across the stage. They toured through the South, her first time seeing signs that marked where she could and couldn't go. It was jarring, but the Whitmans knew how to protect their company. They booked private boarding houses and safe rooming spots in every town, making sure their cast was always fed and sheltered. On stage, she learned professionalism. Offstage, she learned resilience. By the end of the tour, she wasn't just part of the line. She was performing featured numbers. For a young girl from Chicago, it was the education of a lifetime. The Whitmans taught her how to survive show business and how to shine in it. After touring with the Whitman sisters, she formed a new act with her foster sister, Willa Mae Lane. Two young dancers with opposite styles, one in pants, one in a skirt. They booked steady work in Detroit, but then a promoter came through town promising a bigger opportunity out west, a spot at the Culver City Cotton Club in Los Angeles. So they joined a group of about 18 performers and made the trip, only to discover, once they arrived, that no such job existed. The club's show had already been filled. Stranded and nearly broke, the troupe had no idea where to turn. That is when Earl Dancer, the former manager of Ethel Waters, heard what happened. He stepped in, found them housing, and arranged for them to perform in a local industry showcase at the Wilshire E. Bell Theater. Hollywood agents filled the audience that night. Among them were casting executives from RKO, preparing a new musical called Hooray for Love. It would star Bill Bojangles Robinson and Fats Waller. Her performance stopped the room that night, and so they found a spot for her in the movie. For the first time, she stepped onto a Hollywood set to film the number Living in a Great Big Way. In that piece, she became the first Black woman ever to dance on screen with Bill Robinson. His steps were crisp, polished, precise. Hers loose, buoyant, and full of swing. The contrast made the screen crackle. At the film's preview, the crowd stood and cheered. People rushed up to her afterward, asking for autographs, shaking her hand. She remembered thinking they'd lost their minds. A Chicago girl who once watched dancers from the balcony was now sharing the screen with one of the greatest tap artists in history. After Hooray for Love, her performance caught the attention of MGM, and the studio announced her as their $1 million personality girl, signing her to a 5-year contract, a rare commitment for any newcomer. And while many sources claim that Lena Horne was the first African American to sign a long term contract with a major Hollywood studio, that is incorrect. She was the first, male or female. At nearly the same time, MGM had just brought another female tap dancer into the fold, Eleanor Powell, whom the studio was already showcasing at charity banquets, luncheons, and industry events to build excitement for her upcoming starring role in Broadway Melody of 1936. But both women had been slated for the picture, Powell as the star and her in a supporting role. To further promote the film, MGM held a mayor's benefit right on stage 15. The lineup included Bill Robinson, Fats Waller, and both women, each representing the future of tap at MGM. She performed before Powell that evening, and the applause went on and on. 2 encores, 3 bows, the kind of reception any dancer dreams of. But the next morning, her manager, Earl Dancer, was called into a meeting. The message was short: "We can't have 2 female solo tappers." No reason beyond that was ever recorded. She was quietly dropped from the movie. One moment a headline, the next a closed door. She was still a teenager, attending the studio's school with Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland when the dream vanished. There's no way to know what might have been if she'd stayed, if she'd been allowed to grow inside the MGM machine through the golden years of the movie musical. A lost chapter, not just for her, but for what audiences might have seen. But what felt like an ending was really a redirection. Soon after, MGM loaned her to British impresario C.B. Cochrane, who was staging the London company of At Home Abroad, a transfer of the Broadway revue led by Ethel Waters and Eleanor Powell, now retitled Follow the Sun for its West End run. So in London, she took over material that had been introduced by those 2 women on Broadway, reshaping their numbers with her own easy swing and unforced rhythm. The response was electric. One critic called her the brightest spirit ever to step on a stage. Another dubbed her the sepia Cinderella girl who set London agog. Film work followed. While in London, she appeared in Dishonor Bright, playing a cabaret dancer, a small but visible screen turn, with her name in the opening credits, and it kept her face in front of British audiences. Back in the States, she returned, not to Hollywood, but to Harlem. There, in a narrow upstairs room on 131st Street, a place called the Hoofers Club, the heartbeat of tap's evolution. She found herself surrounded by the greats: John Bubbles, Bill Robinson again, Eddie Rector, men whose rhythms could fill a room. And in that room, she was one of the only women. It wasn't a place for politeness, it was survival. Each dancer took a turn, showing what they had, pushing one another to go further. She later said, "Every time I saw something I liked, I'd take it, tear it apart, and make it my own." That is where her individuality was sharpened. Not learned from a teacher, really, but carved from competition. When Hollywood called again, she was ready. Her first major appearance came in Ali Baba Goes to Town, opposite Eddie Cantor. In a fantasy sequence set in a glittering harem, she performed what the crew nicknamed the Turkey Dance, tap dancing in a feathered skirt that flared like wings. It was the first time she'd ever danced in a dress. She'd always been a pants dancer, and she adjusted her style to fit the costume, blending the rhythmic precision she admired in the Nicholas brothers with her own buoyant energy. Her shoes from that performance were later placed in the Smithsonian, preserved as part of dance history. The following year, she appeared in Fools for Scandal, stepping on stage in a white tuxedo and top hat, leading a chorus of women in gowns. The number, There's a Boy in Harlem, flipped expectations. She stood coolly in command, dancing with the kind of poise usually reserved for the men. Critics called it sophisticated. Her best sequence, she later said, was cut after the leading lady complained she was stealing the scene. In Double Deal, a small all-black musical, she finally got to dance without restraint. Full body rhythm, wide movement, all her own choreography. It may not have been a studio picture, but for once, nothing and no one diluted her. By the early 1940s, she was back on stage, this time on Broadway. In Early to Bed, a jazzy musical scored by her old friend Fats Waller, she played Lillian opposite George Zorich, a ballet russe de Monte Carlo dancer newly stepping into Broadway work. On her days off, she'd slip into the balcony at matinees of Katherine Dunham's company, studying how they built dance from the drum outward and absorbing Afro-Caribbean rhythm and form. When she returned to Hollywood, the spotlight had cooled. In Heidi Ho, she reunited with Cab Calloway, but this time as an actress rather than a dancer. The script was thin and the part underwritten, yet it marked one of the rare times a black woman appeared opposite a major band leader in a feature film's dramatic plot. A year later, she turned up in Easter Parade as Essie, Ann Miller's maid, one of several small acting roles she took when the musicals stopped calling. But her real influence stretched far beyond those fleeting cameos. In Los Angeles, she opened her own dance studio, hiring Archie Savage to teach Dunham technique and Lazar Galpern for ballet. She taught jazz and tap. And later, she settled in Vancouver in the late 1960s, founding Troupe One and later Jazz Sync, community performance groups where she taught and trained young dancers, blending tap, jazz, and Afro-Caribbean percussion decades before anyone called it fusion. She taught, performed, and drummed with the same joy she'd always carried. But for years, it seemed the industry barely remembered her. The studio that once called her a $1 million personality girl had long since moved on. Recognition finally came, slowly but meaningfully. She was inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame in 1987, alongside none other than Sammy Davis Jr., received the Flo Burt Lifetime Achievement Award and an honorary doctorate from Oklahoma City University in 2002, and was named to the International Tap Dance Hall of Fame soon after. For her 90th birthday, Vancouver's National Congress of Black Women Foundation held a luncheon in her honor, a tribute to a woman who never stopped dancing. In her words, "It's good to get some recognition after all these years." Even in her 90s, she was still teaching, tap dancing, and moving. She wasn't simply a Hollywood breakthrough. She was a pioneer of American tap dance, among the very first women, black or white, to pursue a solo career in tap. She challenged expectations, performing in trousers at a time when female dancers in skirts were the norm. She shared stages and circuits with the legends who defined the genre, yet always made it her own, and laid pathways for women to follow. Her teaching, her performances, her studios, those weren't just career chapters, they were building blocks. She made space where none had existed, passed movement to the next generation, and left the art form richer than she found it. Her name, Jeni LeGon. And now you know the rest of the story.